Good morning or good afternoon, dear friends. Let's start our next lecture on systemic physiology. This lecture will be devoted systemic mechanisms of adaptation to external environment. We are in conditions of constant reactions and reacting on external environment, on different external factors. And how we'll be able to adapt to these conditions, it determines our quality of our health. That's why this question and this problem in modern situation is very, very important, because we have very high transformation of external environment due to changes and industrial and agriculture development and chemization of external environment, and in result of that we have effect of different ecological factors, chemical and physical factors, and the natural factors of our external environment. So first of all, let's determine classification of different environmental factors. We can divide these factors at least into two groups. It's natural factors, because these factors which that are created by nature, and the anthropogenic factors. These factors and the effect of these factors we have due to activity of humans. It's factors which are created, are formed by humans' activity. Natural factors, we can divide it into two groups. It's abiotic or inorganic factors and biotic factors or living organisms, microorganisms, for example, which act on our body. You can see here some abiotic factors. It's temperature, it's humidity, illumination, it's water and soil saltness, it's atmospheric air, including gases content, pressure, wind, its precipitation, and the relief of surface of Earth. Abiotic factors can be divided into physical and chemical. So physical is temperature, humidity, illumination, magnetic field of Earth, and chemical it's water and soil saltness, its gases content in atmospheric air. Biotic factors can be created or arises due to activity of animals, plants, and microorganisms. Different factors play different role for our existence. And the most limiting factors during evolution was temperature. Temperature of air, but today, now, we can say about the most limiting factor, such factor as biogeochemical transformation due to chemical pollution of external environment. Anthropogenic factors, factors that are created by activity of humans, of human society, or another name is technogenic factors, because these factors are result of industrial and agriculture activity of human population. And you can see examples of such activity and changes due to this activity, natural external environment, and pollution of air, for example, of soil, other components of biosphere and ecosystems due to such anthropogenic influence on all these components of biosphere. Anthropogenic factors, we can divide it as well into chemical and physical in accordance with this nature of these factors. Chemical anthropogenic factors, it's, for example, such toxic factors as heavy metals, it's persistent organic substances, pesticides, for example. It's different chemical inorganic associations, oxide, nitrogen, serum, carbon dioxide, etc. And the physical factors, if we talk about anthropogenic nature of factors, may be artificial or non-natural magnetic fields or radiations, more intensive as natural radiation and illumination, more intensive factors of anthropogenic origin. In result of in result of anthropogenic modification of external environment, we have two types of pollution. It's chemical pollution by different chemical elements and substances, and physical pollution. And that's why we can say now about global or anthropogenic transformation of biosphere. What does it mean for humans? For example, first of all, chemical pollution causes reversible and irreversible changes of biogeochemical circles of chemical elements and the trophic chains, chains on links. You know that we belong to animal, and we use in quality of food, we use different plants uh, uh, and different animals, and the soil on what these plants are and animals are, content of soil, chemical content of different chemical elements comes to plants and to animals, and after that to such consuming of these chains as human. So, chemical pollution of all these components of biogeochemical circle influence, affect on organism of humans, and the chemical elements which circulates along this circle come finally to human body. What occurs in these conditions? Pollution of, in these conditions, we have not only pollution of external environment, but we have pollution of internal environment of humans by chemical substances. And of course, we have influenced the physical factors on human organism. But more we'll talk about chemical pollution because it means changes of homeostasis, of chemical content of internal environment, and it has some consequences for physiology of our organism. Uh, so, in any cases, we have some definite reactions of organism on environmental factors. And this reaction is expressed in process of adaptation. And the mechanism of adaptation to natural factors and anthropogenic factors are different. First of all, adaptation to natural conditions of environment have been realized during long time, during evolution, by natural selection. Survive humans which had the most useful things or properties in order to adapt to definite conditions of external environment. And in this case, we have formation species, and such adaptation we name as genotypic adaptation. Adaptation to anthropogenic or technogenic factors of environment gives us another type of adaptation. Such adaptation we name as phenotypic adaptation, and this adaptation forms due to very fast changes in the limits of individual life circle. That's why in this case we can talk about an individual adaptation or phenotypic adaptation during one individual life circle. Each from us adapt to external environment during our life circle, and it means our individual or our phenotypic adaptation. What result of this adaptation? This result is very good or very well or no. From our quality of our health depends on this. And you can see here, for example, changes of morbidity in the Crimea, and it's morbidity by cancer. And you can see that along during 30 years, we have progressive increase of morbidity. For all the diseases, for example, here, we have such disease as ischemia of heart, the same picture. It's it's hypertonic disease, and it's disorders of blood supply of brain. And you can see in all these cases increases of morbidity by different diseases. And we continue this row, and we can say as well that morbidity on different territories where we have different conditions, natural and anthropogenic, for Crimea Peninsula as well. In result of that, we have different morbidity on different territories. So different factors can influence, can affect and causes different level of morbidity and quality of health. So, adaptation. What is adaptation? What we understand under such definition as adaptation? It's physiological processes which provide a sustainable equilibrium between organism and environment, external environment, and maintenance of homeostasis in constant changing conditions of environment. In accordance of some characteristics of adaptation, I repeat again, we differ genotypic and phenotypic adaptation. Genotypic adaptation is adaptation of species to definite conditions of environment by means conservation of useful adaptive uh, indications and neutral and elimination of harmful things. Phenotypic adaptation, it's individual adaptation by means physiological mechanisms. And of course, uh, last type of adaptation is interesting for us more because in this case we mean quality of health of person which adapt to external environment, to environment in conditions of which this person is. Genotypic, a few words about genotypic adaptation. It's adaptation to natural climate or geographic factors of environment, and it means constitutional and functional peculiarities which form so-called adaptive types or eco-portrait of humans. And we can see that in different race can have the same adaptive type if they live in the same environment conditions. For example, in north and over climatic areas of Eve. Phenotypic adaptation, we can divide it into two types, subtypes. It's non-specific and specific adaptation. At first, phenotypic adaptation has been investigated as adaptation to industrial environment or special types of professional activities, then to anthropogenic or technogenic modified environment. Because last environment, anthropogenic modified environment, uh, becomes more significant for us during last years. Last, not years, of course, last um, 3 or 4 uh, 30 or 40 years for us. Very quickly, we can observe very quickly changes of external environment due to industrial and agriculture development. But some words about the beginning of this sphere of ecological physiology and medicine. I told you that it's physiology of labor, first of all. It's as well cosmic and aviation physiology, submarine physiology, submarine and physiology of sport, etc. Some words about ecological physiology and ecological medicine, which arise due to investigation of influence on humans of modern ecological factors. during last years. You can see here how the mortality is changes in the Crimea in 77 years, you can see here, and 97 years increases, you can see. And it means that quality of health may be due to effect of anthropogenic factors during this time uh, increases, and quality of health decreases, vice versa, decreases because mortality increases. Let's remember why in these conditions we haven't good adaptation to external environment. Why physiological mechanisms are not enough in order to adapt to these conditions. Let's remember what kind of physiological mechanisms we have of adaptation. First of all, you know that these adaptations, this adaptation was described by such famous scientists as Gans Cellier. Gans Cellier said about non-specific adaptive syndrome. What does it mean? It means that in reaction on any strong factors, this reaction we can Cellier named as stress, and this response reaction of organism on strong factor has non-specific nature and includes three stages of stress reaction. It's alarm reaction, it's stage of resistance, and stage of emaciation. And independently of stimuli type and nature of stimuli, all stages develop onto inborn mechanism of reaction. What kind of mechanisms? Physiological providing of all these stages you can see here. First stage is provided by activation of sympathetic autonomous system, sympathetic and not only sympathetic, of sympathoadrenal system. Both these divisions of sympathoadrenal system, sympathetic division and suprarenal glands, secrete catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine. And these substances, chemical substances, provide first stage of stress reaction. Second stage, resistance, is provided by activation of hypothalamus, hypophyseal adrenal system. And in this case, we have another humoral hormonal providing of this stage, because here the most important role plays corticosteroids. First of all, it's cortisol. I remind you that it's a glucocorticoid which provide enough providing of metabolism. And during this stage, we can observe stable adaptation and resistance of organism to action from over strong factors. And finally, third stage, it's emaciation. This stage means that we have emaciation of adrenal glands, which provide stress reactions, all phases of all stages of stress reaction. And in this case, we have emaciation of organism. It means disease or even death. the classic model of stress reaction, its model predator sacrifice, and in this case, we have during first stage mobilization of all organism resources. It's stimulation of all systems excepting digestive system. And during this stage, we have release of energy for active muscular work. Frequently is accompanied by negative emotions, increase of nervous excitability in humans, and needs very high energy expenditure. This stage needs very high energy expenditure. You can see this model, sacrifice and predator, sorry, and all structures of our organism, its psychogenic stress factors, which accept by brain cortex, and then we have excitation hypothalamus, hypophyseal system, and sympathoadrenal system, first of all, and during second stage, it's stimulation hypothalamus, hypophyseal, suprarenal glands axis, and in result of that, we have higher concentration of catecholamines, and after effect of adrenocorticotropic hormone to suprarenal glands, during second stage resistance, we have increase of concentration of glucocorticoids. And it's a neurohumoral providing of this stress, this reaction. Stage of resistance, I told you already that it's due to action of glucocorticoid. We have continuation of mobilization of the energy resources, heightened synthesis of structural and fermentative proteins, and mobilization of human systems. That's why during this stage we have high resistance of organism in relation to action of other external factors. And third stage, emaciation and downfall or death, if factor is extremal stress factor or non-adequate to inborn mechanisms of adaptation of organism. And when the functional reserves are not enough. But good opposite final of these reactions may be long-term adaptation, and it's possible if the functional reserves of organism enough to adapt, and factor in this case is adequate to possibilities of opportunities of organism. At this stage, specific mechanisms of adaptation may be formed. It's so-called structural track of adaptation. For example, such long-term adaptation to systemic physical loads may be muscular hypertrophy, when we have not only functional changes during this load, we have structural adaptation. Mass of muscles increases in this case. If we can observe in sportsmen, we can observe hypertrophy of muscles. You can see here all these stages. It's alarm reaction, it's resistance, and it's stage of emaciation, and resistance organism, you can see, can be different during all these stages, and in particular, interesting adaptation to psychogenic factors. For example, choleric and melancholic persons are not stable and finish usually in such a stress situation by neurosis. It means disorganization of psychic and vegetative functions. So in this case, stress may be bad. Gansellier said about two types of stress. Eustress, it's good stress, and the bad stress. In this case, we can say about bad stress, of course. And different persons react on stress factors differ. You can see here it's very different behavior acts. It may be, for example, it may be all all different behavior acts. You can choose for more acceptable for us type of behavior in stress situation. How we can manage of adaptation, how we can regulate of adaptive process. First of all, in order to increase our resistance to action of stress factor, you should carry out regularly moderate physical loads. It may be tempering, training, hypoxia, and psychogenic auto-training. We should to say some words about specific adaptation. Before that, I told you about non-specific physiological mechanisms, but we have some specific characteristic of adaptation if we have long-term adaptation to some factors. I told you already about systemic physical loads, but for example, such example may be next. It's increase of ferment synthesis, which destroy of toxic substances, etc. And our history has some examples when very important person, queen, for example, processed resistance to action of some toxicants. So we can differ additionally two types of adaptation. It's short-term adaptation, which can be realized due to inborn non-specific mechanisms, and long-term adaptation due to formation of specific mechanisms. So adaptability can be measure of health, because if we have high adaptability, it means that we have well quality of our health. Adaptability as measure of health, it's state of dynamic equilibrium between human body and environment, which is maintained by regulatory systems at concrete energy expenditure and at definite volume of functional adaptive reserve. So it's two sides of quality of our health. How much energy expenditure we have in order to adapt to concrete conditions of external environment, and how much functional adaptive reserve we have. And in accordance with these reserves and the volume of these reserves and energy expenditure, we can differ some levels of adaptation. Um, it's satisfactory adaptation, it's compensatory or partial adaptation, it's tension of adaptation, it's overstrain of adaptation, and fall or destroy of adaptation. Uh, of course, we have here the most volume of functional reserves and the lowest energy expenditure, which permit us to maintain our health on in equilibrium this external environment. And you can see here such scheme which give us presentation about volume of our health, maybe at the beginning of our life, and we have action some factors of on our organism, and we adapt to these factors due to it. Here you can see changes of our functional reserves. This reserves decreases progressively under influence of strong stress factors of external environment. And here you have decreases of functional reserves and increases of functional increases of energy expenditure and decreases of functional reserves. And if we cannot adapt during this last last level of adaptation, in this case, our organism passes on another types of regulation, but in this case, we have less adaptive possibilities, and usually it we have in this case that one disease, chronic disease, arises in person. And progressively during our life, if negative influence of external environment continues, in this case we have the less and less functional possibilities in order to adapt to external environment, and more diseases, main disease and over diseases, which we can observe usually in practical medicine in patient. Not one disease, but many diseases. And that's why such scientists, pathologists as Davidovsky said about adaptation by disease, because here we have living organism, but possibilities to adapt of this organism are less. We have over um, phrase about adaptation, about disease, that disease is limited in freedom life. And in order to adapt and to maintain our life, we pay some price of adaptation. Okay, again, a picture which demonstrates us that anthropogenic pressure exceeds an adaptive reserve of human health. That's why we have increase of morbidity for almost all diseases, somatic diseases, non-specific diseases in practical medicine for public health in the Crimea and here as well. Okay, it's general mechanisms to adaptation. And let's come back to adaptation to some aspects of adaptation to natural factors and after that to anthropogenic factors. It needs say that adaptation to natural factors it's a subject of such science as medical geography. Medical geography investigates influence of nature on human health and distribution of diseases in whole world. For example, here you can see distribution of such disease infections as malaria, and you can see regions where this disease is highest and mid, actually distribution of different infections you can see here. But it needs say that it's in this case we have influence of such natural factors as biotic factors because infections has biotic nature. But we have very many different diseases as a result disadaptation to geochemical factors. And in this case, you can say about natural macroelementosis. And in this case, we have endemic disease because endemos means local diseases in different locus of surface of Earth. And we have even national diseases, which are connected these peculiarities of nutrition and elemental content and their disbalance in soil, food, and water. And you can see here different regions in whole world as a result deficiency of iodine and endemic goiter as endemic disease in these regions, and you can see areas where we meet this disease. Endemic osteo and chondrodystrophy, these diseases are determined by deficiency of calcium and excess of strontium in a ratio of nutrition. And you can see regions where we can meet such disease, and you can see how looks person this such disease. For example, endemic cardiomyopathy or Kishan's disease in China. And you can see here how heart looks in this case. It's normal heart, it's hypertrophied heart, and here as well. And the result of that may be cardiac failure. Fluorosis, excess of storm, deposition, accumulation storm in humans, in organism, causes such strong changes in skeleton and bones and teeth, etc. So it's natural factors. But I repeat that during long time, during evolution, most part of population, approximately 85%, will be, were adapted to these conditions. But last time we have action on humans, not only natural, but technogenic macro elements and micro elements. which promote arising of some microelementosis and some diseases. That's why, due to action of these elements, we can, and over factors, external factors, we can divide it all our diseases in accordance this level of depending from external environment. First of all, indicators diseases which have close dependence from external environment. It's a cancer, for example. Second group, it's ecological dependent diseases. Have average dependence, and it may be, for example, child mortality, it's pathology of digestive, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, etc. And ecological determined diseases, reasonable dependence have these diseases. It's for example, pathology of pregnancy, bronchitis, cardiovascular diseases, different diseases, etc. And we can say that diseases of visceral systems, cardiovascular system, respiratory, digestive, immune, excretory system, all these systems have ecological dependence, different level of ecological dependence, which can be differ in different regions of Eve. And of course, we can such regulatory system as endocrine and nervous system can be related to these diseases. And even stomatology and otolaryngology diseases, genetic disorders, different disadaptive manifestations of child health disorders, premature aging, and decrease in life expectancy. So we can say maybe that we have dependence, enough strong dependence of our health from different external factors and anthropogenic transformation in different regions. And in different regions, this transformation, this influence, this effect may be different, may have different level, and this relation may be different, closer, more or less. For example, in regions when countries use very high quality of quantities of persistent organic substances in agriculture. We have influence of pesticides, for example, on digestive system, on central nervous system, endocrine system, immune system, excretory system, etc. And over inorganic chemical pollutants, it's heavy metals, which can causes neoplasms, influence on blood system, digestive system, endocrine system. It needs say that for central nervous system, chemical homeostasis play very important role for normal functioning of our nervous tissue. That's why different factors can change processes in tissue, nervous tissue, and it needs say the synapse is a very target structure for for action of different pollutants. For example, we have in synapses different neurotransmitters, and in this case, on mechanism of transmission of excitation uh, on these neurotransmitters, different uh, factors can influence on synthesis, for example, of this neurotransmitter, such heavy metals as zinc, iron, copper, and these elements are included in chemical structure of catecholamines, neuropeptides, and influence on process of accumulation and releasing of neurotransmitters. For example, amphetamine causes a fast releasing of norepinephrine. Uh, uh, these substances can influence on binding this receptor and initiation of natural neurotransmitter action. It's such chemical mimicry or block of receptors when these factors are antagonists these neurotransmitters, or inhibition of neurotransmitters inactivation. For example, pesticides prevent inactivation of acetylcholine because have acetylcholinesterase action. So very many different targets may be in transmission of excitation through synapse for different chemical substances, anthropogenic substances, inorganic and organic substances. In spite of that, microelements are trace elements because these elements in our body are presented in very, very small quantity. But this disbalance of these elements, because these elements are included in accessor substances. It means that these substances are regulatory substances. For example, hormone, enzymes, biological active substances, over biological active substances, etc. Very important to correct this disbalance because it famous that correction of elements disbalance in patient is equal a role of genetic factors in determination of health. It's very, very important, and it's very important consequence of pollution of external environment, and very important conclusion for practical medicine in order to correct this disbalance and correct state of our health. And we unfortunately ignore this conclusion and the importance of this correction. Microelements participate in formation of catalytic center more than 1,000 enzymes. That's why it's very important. And some heavy metals, for example, zinc, magnesium, participate in synthesis and degradation of endorphin, hypothalamus releasing factor, substance P, etc. So disbalance of these elements has very serious consequences for our health and for a state of our homeostasis. It's interesting that functional brain asymmetry, as you remember, left hemisphere is responsible for our arithmetic, mathematic possibilities, our thinking. Uh, Depends on some peculiarities of chemical homeostasis. For example, left hemisphere contains more iron, copper, and manganese. Excess of manganese uh, causes manganism encephalopathy. It's progressive disorders in motor activity in result of manganese accumulation in basal ganglia. Such toxic microelements as lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic are famous as neurotoxic heavy metals. Uh, and if have mothers have in pregnant females have high more concentration of these toxic elements, then it needs in this case elimination from fetus is delayed. Mercury intoxication is revealed in 22 newborns as child cerebral palsy, and mercury destroy exons. Demyelinization is famous as consequence of mercury action of on nervous tissues, on axons, for example. Lead, accumulation of lead, American scientists calculated that if accumulation of lead more above 20, 10 and 20, this quantity in children blood, in this case, economical hazard is such, and it means that these children will have consequences of behavioral disorders, increased aggression, social disadaptation, etc., decrease IQ and attention. IQ, you know, it's intellectual possibility of a person. And more than 50 milligrams na decaliters create risk of neurobehavioral development. Pesticides. It's known that agriculture workers belong to persons this increased risk of dementia, loss of memory, velocity of information processes, thinking. Chlorine containing pesticides in our territory, in the Crimea, for example, in Soviet Union, we use these pesticides. These pesticides have lipophilic action, easy penetrating brain, break and activity of important enzyme systems, cause hypoxia, stimulates exit of acetylcholine in synaptic endings. As a result of all these actions, it's disorders of nervous processes balance, increase excitability of one structures and inhibition of another ones. And the physiological mechanism of some action may be effect on calcium channels in presynaptic membrane, promoting the depolarization and stimulation the exit of dopamine and acetylcholine. It known calcium ions can protect effect of DDT. Organic phosphorus pesticides are derivative of neuroparalytic gases. And the mechanism of action of these pesticides is inhibition of acetylcholine esterase activity due to destroy excess of acetylcholine after transmission of excitation in synapses. And ultimately the same result, excess of acetylcholine and hyperexcitation of nervous structures, and the result of that we have disturbance of transmission and paralysis of skeletal muscles. Influence on endocrine system. You can see that in this year, total character of treat in result of endocrine diseases from hidden pathological effect of pesticides and dioxin, burning of plastic bags. And the same effect on metabolism of neurotransmitter, hormones, and biological active substances. You can see here mechanisms of action. It's initiation or initiation, of hormonal specific effects, in particular of estrogens, androgens, steroid hormones. It's blocking of interaction between hormones and receptors, and its effects on metabolism. For example, acceleration of hydroxylation and desactivation, and the effects in result of that on hormone synthesis change, they change of quantity of specific hormonal receptors and interaction with these uh, natural hormones, agonism, strengthening, antagonisms, weakening of effect, etc. Especially significant on systems this high intensity of metabolism, because high metabolism, high intensity of metabolism, it's thus target its target of process for action of different pollutants. But it means that the reproductive system is very sensitive to action of pollutants, and in result of that we have hermaphroditism, disruption of spermatogenesis, frequently now reduction in sexual activity, what we can observe now in whole world, disruption of sexual glands function, etc. Concerning thyroid gland, heavy metals affect more significantly on functional state deficiency of iodine. Compounds of fluorine in metallurgy, we have such situation, and pesticides cause anomaly of development, disorders of hormonal metabolism. On blood system, we have, sorry, Russian language, we have influence on blood system because pesticides stimulates excretion and excretion of potassium ions, and disbalance of sodium and potassium equilibrium, and it causes disorders of structure, proteins and lipids systems of erythrocytes, and it causes changes of morphology of erythrocytes membrane and form of erythrocytes, and the hemolytic resistance of erythrocytes decrease in this case, etc. We have very many different diseases as consequence of some chemical elements on different systems. Sorry for Russian language. We have allergy, for example, due to this action, and due to influence of on immune system, allergy and the autoimmunization. It's very strong disorder of immune system. So we have almost all systems which have more or less consequences of negative influence of different chemical factors. For digestive system of, for example, which is gate of organism, and its first system which accept of action of these pollutants, we know that metabolic degradation of organic contaminants, organic pollutants, is realized in liver, intestine wall, in vascular system and kidneys by non-specific esterase. And these processes, first of all, this heat, first of all, except digestive system. And liver, you know, has such function as desintoxication. And liver has contains 4 enzyme system for that, which determined its detoxification power of all these substances. In particular, first of all, I mean organic substances. But it needs say that these substances are synthetic substances. It's non-natural organic substances, and that's why due to degradation or destroy of these substances is in liver, we can get more toxic metabolites of this degradation. And the failure, this function causes accumulation of one's internal environment of our body, of human body. More effect, for example, it's decrease of protein synthetic function, and by liver it causes of albumin content and osmotic disbalance. In agriculture, besides organic substances, pesticides, for example, we use mineral fertilizers. For example, oxides of nitrogen. And under digestive enzymes action, these nitrates transform in nitrites and nitrosamines, which have cancer action on digestive system and on other systems of our organism after these substances comes to blood. And ecological, that's why due to negative influence on digestive system as gate of our organism for pollutants, we have some ecological aspects of nutrition. And I remind you main rules for our rational nutrition. It may be conformity of product energy cost to energy expenditure. It may be quality content relation of food between proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates, as here, and plus microelements and vitamins. And energy consumption releasing in result of catabolism can be used to provide the physiological processes, for example, contraction of muscles, of heart, to maintain of body temperature and storage of energy. And in different of climatic and geographic regions, independent on temperature, we have different quality content of food and its energetic cost. We have very considerably these ones. In warm countries, for example, we have more vegetarianism and more vegetarian nutrition. When in this case, you if in warm countries using in national cuisine species seasonings to stimulate gastric secretion in order to compensate insufficient quantity of digestive secrets in gaster, for example, and in intestine. But in northern countries, we have and we need, not we, but persons who live there, needs rich in calories fatty foods of animal origin, because in this food have more calories and more, for example, different amino acids, needed amino acids, etc. But first of all, calories. And in order to regulate and determine more acceptable nutrition in different geographical regions, we have and religious taboos on some types of food. For example, pig meat in Islam. Ecological peculiarities of thermoregulation is determined by structure or expresses in body structure, different growth, type of constitution, distribution of sweet blends. Physiological peculiarities is expressed in different intensity of metabolism. For example, lipids in high content if alpha cholesterol in persons which live in north region, etc. Okay, maybe not all aspects, very important and interesting aspects of influence of external factors of external environment I have just considered today, but I think that interest for this problem arises due to this, in result of this lecture, and because you are from different countries and you understand finally understood maybe in the end at the end of this lecture that we have different adaptive mechanisms, long-term mechanisms as adaptation for natural factors, and we have some diseases which determined by action of these factors as well. But more important in modern condition, it's influence on our health, anthropogenic factors, because we form these factors in result of our technogenic activity in our industry and agriculture, but we have consequences of such strong modification of external environment for our health, because pollution of external environment means pollution of internal environment, and we have very many different chemical elements and synthetic organic substances which pollute our organism and influence on biochemical reactions in our organism, and physiological, it means on physiological processes as well. That's why it's very interesting and not very good presenting a problem in our practical medicine. But I hope the interest for this problem you take into account in your future practical medical activity. For today, that's all. Thank you for your attention and goodbye.